Joining me now, Senator Robert Menendez, a Democrat from New Jersey and the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Good morning, Senator Menendez. And let's start with a little foreign relations and talk about the president's decision to send military assistance to the rebels in Syria. I want to start out by playing something that one of your colleagues, Senator John McCain, said on the Senate floor in response to the news.
They need a lot more than military assistance. We need to establish the no-fly zone. We need a safe zone within Syria. Every time that we have escalated a bit in our assistance, the Russians, Hezbollah, the Iranians are all in.
Senator McCain, obviously, in the Senate Rotunda, actually, talking to CNN. But Senator Menendez, tell me, do you think this is too little? Do the rebels need more?
Well, Candy, as the Foreign Relations Committee voted nearly a month ago on a strong bipartisan vote of 15-3, we believe the rebels need to be armed, the moderate elements of those rebels. 2 years later, we've come to know who they are. I think public intelligence sources have said that we've come to know who, in fact, we could ultimately arm. And the reality is we need to tip the scales, not simply to nudge them. And the president's moving in the right direction. And to a large degree, this is about whether or not we exert American leadership with our allies abroad, both in the Gulf region and in Europe. A lot of what we might want to see done can be done through our allies if we direct them and tell them this is where we want to head.
So
but if Assad continues to have unlimited air power and artillery, that's a hard battle to win against, simple arms.
So, Senator, it does sound to me like you do believe that some way, somehow, either U.S. directed or U.S. executed, that airstrips in Syria need to be taken out because Iran brings in supplies that way. You think perhaps you ought to be able to ground Bashar al-Assad's air weapons and perhaps a safe zone in northern Syria, all of which a lot of folks say should happen. So it sounds to me as though you are for those things.
Well, I'm certainly for giving the vetted, moderate elements of the Syrian opposition the wherewithal to have a fighting chance to lead us to a better political solution than we are today, and to do that expeditiously. And then you have to consider other options with your allies as to whether or not, for example, you might consider, ripping up airfields so that, Assad's Air Force cannot take off. That's an example of a limited action that ultimately can produce big benefits. So,
and you think in order to tip the balance,
you can't just simply send them, a pea shooter against a blunderbuss at the end of the day, or else our vital national security interests, time is not on our side, and our vital national security interests will not be pursued.
So you would like more?
I think the president is headed in that direction. This is the first step. Obviously, he's convinced that the red line he himself subscribed has been clearly passed. And there are vital national security interests of the United States here that need to be pursued. Not having a state that is totally in disarray in which terrorist entities can operate. You have already al-Qaeda. You have Iranian National Revolutionary Guard. You have Hezbollah. Right. You have chemical weapon caches. You have Jordan next door, which has been a good ally, increasingly 500,000 refugees and growing. So this has real consequences if we don't act soon.
Let me ask you about Egypt's decision to cut off ties with Syria. How do you take that news? What does that mean vis-a-vis the U.S. and Egypt? Why do you think Morsi took this action?
I think Morsi took that action primarily for his own domestic consumption, from a secular point of view. I mean, I should say from a Sunni point of view. And so I think that was largely driven for that reason. I'm not necessarily of the belief that he drove it because he wanted to be alongside with us in trying to isolate Assad.
Let me turn you to immigration reform. One of your fellow members of the Gang of Eight, Marco Rubio, has said it's not going to pass the Senate if border security isn't strengthened and if the ultimate measure includes a provision that gives the same immigration rights to same-sex couples. Where do you stand on this? Do you believe that's true, that you're going to have to significantly up the border security faction of this bill?
Well, Candy, first of all, before we even pass this bill, we have more border security than at any other time in the nation's history, more border patrol, more customs
Sure, but
inspectors,
it's not enough
more
to
aerial
satisfy
surveillance.
critics of the bill.
Yeah, but our bill, well, there are critics of our bill in which 10 angels could come swearing from above that this is the best legislation for America, and they would say the angels lie. So those I can never solve or satisfy. We put $6.5 billion additional dollars. We allowed those senators from the Gang of Eight who come from border states largely to devise this. You know, I would simply say to our colleagues, we are open. If you want greater specificity about what that border plan looks like, we're open to that. But what we cannot have, and what I cannot support, and what I believe the community cannot support at the end of the day, is that we're going to have triggers that can never be achieved in terms of border security as an impediment to the pathway to legalization and citizenship. And I would tell my Republican colleagues, both in the House and the Senate, that the road to the White House comes through a road with a pathway to legalization. Without it, there'll never be a road to the White House for the Republican Party.
So you think without passage, you can't elect a Republican president?
I'm convinced that the last election, you know, had a demographic shift in the nation.
Right.
It spoke very loudly about its views on immigration reform, but that shift also represents where the American people are at. In poll after poll, just this week there were several polls in which anywhere between 70 and 80% of the American people want to see our immigration system reformed, and over 70% support a pathway to citizenship as part of that solution. So yes, border security, that's why we put $6.5 billion. That's why we allow the border state senators to largely devise this. That's why we're open to constructive elements of how border security can be further achieved, but not if at the end of the day you're just simply using that as an excuse not to permit a pathway to legalization.
And Senator Rubio, as you know, has been sort of out there as part of you know, the push to try to get this thing passed, and clearly he has to balance his appeal to conservatives who are not quite so friendly to this immigration bill and his allegiance to the immigration bill. In the end, do you worry that he will walk away from it, because he has said without further border security, and if there is the same-sex provision in that, it's not going to pass and he would walk?
Well, I believe that Senator Rubio has been a very constructive member of the Gang of Eight. I believe he's committed to the legislation as we devised it. If we could find ways to satisfy greater numbers of the Republican Party in a way that doesn't undermine the core principles as a pathway to citizenship, family reunification as key elements of this legislation, you know, he'll have the flexibility to be able to do that. You know, but at the end of the day, I think he is so into this process that I think he would lose out not to continue. And I have no indication that he has no desire or intention not to continue. He's been a very good ally in this Gang of Eight and has been very helpful in bringing people to the bill, as has Lindsey Graham and John McCain and Jeff Flake. So we're going to get this done. We're going to get past it in the Senate. And the question is, can we create the impetus and send a message to the House Republican leadership, does Speaker Boehner want immigration reform or not?
And quickly, if I can get just a single number from you, by how much does this bill have to pass in the Senate to send that message to the House? 70 votes?
Well, listen, Candy, you know, I don't want to create an artificial new barrier.
Not gonna
to
play.
get 60 votes on anything controversial in the Senate is a rarity. So when we hit 60 votes, which we will, I have no doubt that other people will want to be on the right side of history, and that will send a very strong message to the House.
Senator Robert Menendez, thanks for your time this morning. Happy Father's Day.
Thank you, and happy Father's Day to everybody out there.